Hey everyone, I am your host Peter Zablocki and you're listening to History Shorts. I hope everyone's having a great day so far and thank you for making this show a small part of that. If you'd like to help me out with a small gesture, please leave History Shorts a rating or a review and click that subscribe button if you haven't already done so. For sources and books used as the basis for these episodes, how to advertise on the show, and other information such as a list of our upcoming guests on the Conversation series, or a link to our Patreon account where you can listen to exclusive episodes not heard here, please visit www.historyshortspodcast.com. Today's episode is brought to you by the Podcast Republic, your ultimate podcast listening app. Discover and subscribe to thousands of podcasts from around the globe, all in one place. Download Podcast Republic now and take your podcast experience to the next level. Having said all of that, in 1860, as the nation teetered on the brink of civil war, the Republican Party crafted a ticket designed to bridge the divides of a fractured Union. Abraham Lincoln, a self-taught prairie lawyer from Illinois, needed balance, someone seasoned, staunchly anti-slavery, and from the East. The choice was not the man that you likely remember, the one that became the president after Lincoln's assassination, Andrew Johnson. That was the second-term vice president. I'm talking about Hannibal Hamlin, a former Jacksonian Democrat turned radical abolitionist from Maine. Though relatively unknown to the public, even to this day, Hamlin brought moral clarity and political weight to the ticket. Here is the rest of that story.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941,
it's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Hamlin had begun his political career as a Democrat, serving in the House and the Senate, before breaking with his party over its growing alignment with slavery. A man of New England grit and radical conviction, he joined the fledgling Republican Party in the mid-1850s and was quickly elected governor of Maine. Within weeks, however, he resigned the governorship to return to the Senate, believing that his presence in Washington was needed to fight the spread of slavery on the national stage. When he arrived in Washington as vice president in 1861, he left behind the power and independence of a Senate seat to assume a role that was ceremonial, constrained, and to his mind, deeply unsatisfying. Hamlin loathed the limited powers of the office of the vice president, calling himself a fifth wheel of a coach. He presided over the Senate, but was excluded from cabinet meetings and high-level discussions. Though he and Lincoln shared many ideological values, their relationship was very distant. He was ultimately just brought in on the ticket to bring in the Eastern vote. So the two rarely met socially or politically for that matter, and Mary Todd Lincoln disliked Hamlin's puritanical manner. Nevertheless, he fulfilled his duties with quiet tenacity. The outbreak of the Civil War only heightened his frustration. As Southern states seceded and Confederate troops fired on Fort Sumter, Hamlin watched from the sidelines, eager to play a greater role. Aware that the vice presidency granted him little official influence, he used informal channels instead, his friendships in the Senate and connections in New England to push Lincoln's administration toward a more aggressive anti-slavery posture. He was among the first within the administration to support the enlistment of black troops, seeing both the moral and military necessity of emancipation as a war aim. Hamlin viewed slavery as the root cause of the conflict and believed that any victory that left it intact would be very hollow. In internal discussions, he urged Lincoln to use the president's war powers to free the enslaved. Though Lincoln was more cautious, seeking to preserve the fragile loyalty of border states, he listened carefully. Hamlin's persistent advocacy, along with pressure from abolitionists and the realities of the war, helped pave the way for the Emancipation Proclamation. While Lincoln became the public face of emancipation, Hamlin was its quiet conscience. He celebrated the proclamation not as a political move, but as a moral necessity. And when black men began to enlist in the Union Army, he cheered their bravery, calling their service proof that the war for freedom was also a war for equality. Yet in the end, Hamlin's place in history was undercut not by failure or scandal, but by the cold calculus of wartime politics. As the election of 1864 approached, President Lincoln faced a daunting challenge. The Civil War, now entering its fourth year, had drained the North's morale. Casualties mounted by the thousands, and Union victories remained scarce. Radical Republicans pressed for harsher measures against the South, while moderates and war Democrats feared Lincoln's increasingly emancipatory stance would drive away support in key border and northern states. Lincoln's advisors, acutely aware of this political tightrope, believed that a gesture toward national unity was essential to secure victory at the ballot box. They urged him to broaden his appeal by choosing a running mate who could attract conservative voters, particularly in the border states and among pro-Union Southerners. Hannibal Hamlin, despite his loyalty, was seen as a liability to that effort. He was a New Englander through and through, firm in his abolitionist beliefs, uncompromising in his moral stance, and closely associated with the radical wing of the Republican Party. To Lincoln's political strategists, Hamlin appeared too regional, too ideologically rigid, and too easily caricatured by opponents as part of the radical anti-Southern elite. Though he had served the administration faithfully, he had not been a central figure in its day-to-day wartime strategy. He lacked a strong national profile, and crucially, he lacked connections to the Democratic base that Lincoln hoped to sway. In his place, Lincoln selected Andrew Johnson, a Southern Democrat from Tennessee who had remained loyal to the Union even as his home state joined the Confederacy. Johnson had served as a military governor of Tennessee under Union occupation and was seen as a symbol of national reconciliation, a living rebuttal to the Confederacy's claim that the South was united in rebellion. His presence on the ticket was meant to signal a future of healing and reintegration. The decision was thus made quietly and politically, with Lincoln offering no personal rebuke of Hamlin, but also no meaningful defense of him. Hamlin himself was not consulted, nor even formally notified before the announcement. He learned of his removal through the newspapers, like any other citizen. The moment was a bitter one for the man who had stood beside Lincoln at the dawn of war, who had helped steer the nation toward emancipation, and who had given up his powerful Senate seat to serve. For Hamlin, a man of conviction rather than ambition, it was a deeply personal wound, one inflicted not by enemies, but by allies in pursuit of expediency. Though he remained loyal to Lincoln, the dismissal wounded him. He had sacrificed political capital, friends, and influence for the cause of the Union and emancipation. He had served quietly, without scandal, and pushed the administration toward justice. And yet, when political calculation came into play, he was discarded. Ironically, had Hamlin remained on the ticket, history may have taken a vastly different turn. When Lincoln was assassinated in April of 1865, it was Andrew Johnson who assumed the presidency, and whose leniency toward the defeated South and resistance to black civil rights would derail Reconstruction. Hamlin, by contrast, had long favored a radical approach: harsh terms for former Confederates, voting rights for freedmen, and federal oversight to protect civil liberties. It is easy to imagine a President Hamlin steering the country on a very different course. After leaving the vice presidency, Hamlin briefly stepped away from public life, but could not stay idle for too long. He accepted an appointment as collector of the Port of Boston, a prestigious and influential post, but resigned after a year in protest of President Johnson's policies. Disillusioned by the direction of the post-war government, he returned to Maine and was soon re-elected to the Senate, where he served another 12 years. In his second tenure, Hamlin continued to champion civil rights and constitutional amendments that sought to secure the gains of emancipation. He chaired the Foreign Relations Committee, supported Reconstruction measures, and pushed back against efforts to reestablish white supremacy in the South. He remained principled and unyielding, a man who measured success not by popularity, but by moral alignment. In 1881, after retiring from the Senate, he was appointed minister to Spain, an honorable diplomatic post that he held briefly. He spent his final years in Maine, where he walked the same streets he had known as a boy, long removed from the power centers of Washington. By the time he died on July 4, 1891, on the very day the nation celebrated its independence, he had outlived 6 of the vice presidents who had succeeded him. History, however, had moved on. Today, Hannibal Hamlin is largely forgotten, a name that rarely appears in textbooks or public consciousness. He has no memorial in Washington, no great biography, no films or television specials to retell his story. Even in Maine, where his political career began, his legacy is often eclipsed by others. Yet his influence on American history is undeniable. He helped craft the Republican platform that opposed the expansion of slavery. He gave the Lincoln ticket Eastern credibility and moral ballast. He was among the earliest high-level advocates for emancipation and black enlistment, and he might well have shaped Reconstruction far more favorably had he been in the White House when Lincoln died. Hamlin's story reminds us that history often overlooks the quiet man, the ones who choose principle over power and conscience over fame. He lacked Lincoln's poetry, Seward's ambition, or Chase's brilliance, but he was steady, incorruptible, and brave. He never sought the spotlight. He sought what was right. Thanks for listening.